25 investigates tonight with a warning about mold in public buildings across the state and what it means for your health.
Our team found mold complaints in courthouses, fire stations, libraries, even your kids' schools. Anchor and investigative reporter Carrie Kavanaugh learned pandemic precautions may have led to a spike in these moldy matters.
25 Investigates got a tip about mold throughout a major public library. Through a series of public records requests, we found a much more widespread problem. Mold is an issue in buildings all across the state. Cleanup isn't cheap, and the pandemic may have made it worse. We also wanted to know how exposure to that mold could affect you.
Welcome to West Plymouth Fire Station number 2, one of the living quarters. You can see mold and...
Can you smell it?
Yeah, you can smell it.
Plymouth Fire Captain Brian Baragwanath says after years with a leaky roof, the mold got so bad.
Right here in the, it's all just covered up. And
it was no longer safe for firefighters and paramedics to sleep in here.
this spot right here is what actually finally got this building condemned.
That's when staff moved into a temporary trailer. Only here,
every exposed wall, you can see it's worse over here.
Even more mold.
I need my staff to be as healthy as they can, and these stations are working against me.
Fire Chief Ed Bradley says in the trailer they had to follow COVID safety protocols. That meant doors and windows were open during a humid and rainy summer.
So you're addressing one problem and potentially creating another.
We're trying to address one problem and keep crews healthy, and it created another problem, and now their building is not healthy.
This isn't just a problem here.
Libraries are especially susceptible because of all of the books and other things that mold loves to grow on.
At the Bridgewater State University Library, 25 Investigates found signs warning of moldy books in early October.
I think across the Commonwealth it's challenging.
Mark David Carmody is the university's Assistant Vice President of Operations. He says the challenge is combating humidity while following pandemic precautions.
One of the strategies is to bring in as much fresh air into the building as possible. That's hot, humid, fresh air that takes a little bit longer to condition. Those things combined create an opportunity for mold to grow.
And it did. Despite 6 large dehumidifiers running along with 3 air scrubbers, Carmody says the university needed to have some 300,000 books specially cleaned, losing dozens in the process. Bridgewater State says it spent $250,000 on mold mitigation at the library since July. Mold also grew in schools during the pandemic, but for a different reason. Those buildings were largely sealed up during remote learning. South Hadley High School in Western Mass delayed its September reopening to mitigate mold throughout. 25 Investigates reached out to 18 school districts across the state. Of the 13 districts that responded, 11 had mold issues over the last 2 years, particularly during this past summer, including Braintree, Framingham, Salem, Beverly. Duxbury schools had 16 mold complaints at 4 buildings over 13 months. Plymouth schools said it had 19 complaints of mold in 4 schools over just 3 months. And in courthouses from Malden to Concord to Newton to West Roxbury, the state has had to remediate mold issues. The Hampden County Courthouse in Springfield was temporarily shut down in August after numerous agencies lodged complaints there.
Mold itself, if we're breathing it in or inhaling it, it could go into our lungs and stimulate a reaction.
That's Dr. Shahzad Khan, a pulmonologist at UMass Medical in Worcester. He says mold could trigger a cough, congestion, wheezing, and asthma, and a person's reaction depends on length of exposure.
Usually like higher concentrations or for prolonged periods where there's bad ventilation.
Back in Plymouth, Chief Bradley said a recent survey of union members revealed more than 60% of them were dealing with some health effects of mold exposure.
Do you feel safe just coming to work?
I don't. I had to pay out of pocket for a CT exam of my lungs just to make sure that I was healthy.
Out in the street, they're dealing with enough hazards. That shouldn't have to happen here in the building.
As for the firehouse, the Plymouth mayor says they are aggressively and actively working on upgrading and renovating many of our fire stations, as well as our other older town and school buildings. Dr. Khan says don't ignore symptoms like coughing, shortness of breath, or wheezing. See a doctor. For 25 Investigates, I'm Carrie Kavanaugh.